Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Crime and Punishment Recap series. We're on our last episode for the early modern period because we are now looking at punishments. So again, just like with Law and Order, we're going to look at how things changed in terms of punishments in early modern Britain compared to the medieval period, and if there was any continuity between the two time periods. So in terms of continuity, fines continue to be used since medieval England through into early modern Britain. They're often used for petty crimes, for example, minor assault and low-level theft. And this is often the most common way of punishing a criminal because it was a good source of income for lords and the government and the king. You also get a continuity in the form of shaming and public humiliation. So examples of continuity include the pillory and stocks for rogue traders, where they would be forced to sit in a pillory or a stock in the middle of a town square, whilst the rest of the village or town pelted excrement at them or rotten food and sometimes even rocks. And this is a way of shaming them publicly. However, you do get some changes. So the cucking stool is not new to early modern Britain. We talked about it in the medieval time period for scolds, but there is also a new punishment for scolds in this time period, and that is the ducking stool. The ducking stool was like a wooden chair on the end of a long beam of wood, and it would be the scold would be strapped onto that wooden chair, and then they would be ducked into a river or pond multiple times, and it was supposed to cover the idea that it would cool off their hot tongue that had got them into trouble in the first place. But unfortunately, sometimes this might lead to the death of the woman either through hypothermia or shock or even drowning. You also get another new punishment in early modern Britain for scolds, and that is the scold's bridle, which is the big heavy iron frame that scolds would be forced to wear, where there would be a spike projecting out of the frame to press onto their tongues, and then they could be then publicly humiliated by wearing this in public and being dragged through the town. You also get increased public penance. Now, public penance is where a offender would have to go to a church, normally on a Sunday, which would be the day of service, and they would have to publicly confess to their crimes in front of the village and in front of the eyes of God, because it would be in church, and they would have to beg for forgiveness. Now, the reason that increases in early modern Britain is because of the rise of Puritanism. They are increasingly concerned about sexual immorality, so this is how they would punish that. You also get the fact that there is increased whipping for vagrants, again due to the rise in Puritanism and the concerns over this, but you also get from 1572 branding and mutilations. So for example, vagrants could have a hot iron bar pressed through their ear, which would leave a hole about the size of a penny, and this was a way of marking vagrants in case they repeatedly offended. So there are some changes to this type of punishment, shaming and public humiliation, but there are lots of increases as well. Imprisonment, again, jails are not new to early modern Britain. They existed in medieval times as well, and they continue to be mainly used for people in debt or those awaiting trial. But you do get a change because there are more prisons built, for example, with the 1531 Jail Act, which encourages justices of peace to build more prisons. But like I said, it's mainly still used for the same kinds of crimes. A new example, though, of punishment in early modern Britain is Bridewells. Bridewells are basically houses of correction, kind of like prisons, but they were meant for vagrants. So vagrants were sent to these places and they would be forced to do hard labour. And that's again because of the rise in Puritanism and the concern over idleness. In 1609, you get the Vagabond Act, which again forces justices of peace to create more Bridewells in each county. Another punishment that we have talked about before is hanging, drawing and quartering. Continuity in terms of the fact that this was the punishment for those who committed high treason, but it is a change because there was an increased use of this type of execution because there is lots of political upheaval at the time. For example, a good example of this is the Gunpowder Plot in 1605, where Guy Fawkes was tortured and then hung, drawn and quartered. Perhaps the most significant change in punishments during this time is something called the Bloody Code. Now, the Bloody Code is basically when an increasing number of crimes were punishable by death. So there's continuity in the fact that it's still hangings, but there was a change because 150 new crimes became punishable by death in 1820. All of these executions would take place in public. And the reason that the bloody code comes into existence is because MPs, so members of parliament, realised that they are increasingly the victims of organised crime and rising crime rates during this time. For example, smuggling and highway robbery and poaching all removes money from their pockets. So MPs are trying to protect their wealth from organised crime, and the best way that they can do this, considering that they have no police force, is to try and make capital punishments applicable to as many different types of crimes as possible, because then that would remove different criminals from society and would act as a deterrent. And like I said, all of these executions would take place in public as a warning. However, interestingly, the number of executions actually reduced after the bloody code, and historians think that this is largely a result of the fact that judges and juries were a bit concerned, or very concerned, about passing down a death penalty for relatively minor crimes. For example, they would often try and reduce the amount that somebody might have stolen, or they might have tried to be lenient with the sentence rather than executing them. So the bloody code is a really important example of change, because lots of new crimes become punishable by death. All in all then, punishments are still there to deter crime in early modern Britain. And they're also there to remove and seek revenge on criminals, because there is not an organised, well-trained and effective law enforcement system in place to prevent crime. That does not start to take shape until industrial Britain, and is then developed into modern Britain. So punishments are still the main way of stopping crime during this time period. That wraps up punishments and the early modern period. In the next episode, we'll be moving on to what industrial Britain was like, and all of the changes that happened in terms of crime, law enforcement and punishment for that one. So please continue to watch in order to see the industrial period.